Less than a week after this protest rocked the prestigious private school, it's facing a human rights investigation. The Human Rights Commission says it acted swiftly as allegations of discrimination and racism are serious and need urgent attention. The meeting between the South African Human Rights Commission and, of course, the management of the Cornwall Hill College right here in Irene took place online. The meeting took place for around about an hour, according to the Commission, and several issues were discussed. The Commission initially demanded to visit Cornwall Hill College to assess the climate after Monday's protest, but the meeting was held virtual as the school principal is in COVID-19 isolation.
We have not received any formal complaints from anyone at the school, but our constitutional mandate requires us to also act in the public interest. This matter was in the public domain. It implicates a number of rights, and our overriding concern is the rights of children. Their best interests are paramount in any matter, and that is why we are getting involved, and that is why we are calling on the parents to also come forward with any information.
Parents and learners will be interviewed to get to the bottom of what's happening at the school.
We have determined that in order to fully assess this matter, there is an urgent need to meet with the parents. And we are hopeful that through the facilitation of the school, they will allow us to use their facilities in order to convene a meeting with the parents of the learners at the school. We are then going to request permission from the parents to interview the learners. We'll also, after reviewing information gleaned from our discussions and interviews with the learners, then conduct interviews with the teachers, with the school management, and with the board of the school. Once you have all this information, the commission will then conduct an assessment and a final analysis as to whether or not any one or more of the rights listed in the Bill of Rights were violated.
The Commission has appealed to the school to cooperate with the probe. Many parents welcomed the intervention, saying it's a step closer to equality at the school. It may take up to 6 months before remedial actions are tabled. Cornwall Hill management was not available for reaction and referred to a joint statement issued with the Human Rights Commission. Patricia Fasachi, SABC News in Irene, Centurion.
All right, for more on this, we now talk to diversity trainer Asanda Ngoasheng. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with, the Human Rights Commission there, I hope you heard, saying a lot of things have to be investigated. It wants to speak to parents, teachers, management. For you, is this a clear-cut case of racism? Just talk about what what your perceptions are around what's going on at Cornwall.
Thank you so much for having me. I think that, this is yet another example of yet another school that is struggling with what is actually a societal problem. And I think that part of what is making it so difficult for us to be able to deal with this issue is because we're still dealing with it in a piecemeal way, where we're looking at particular hotspots in particular schools. We have racism as a problem in South African society, and it is manifesting itself in all institutions of society. So whether you're looking at corporate or at schools, or you're looking at even universities, we're seeing it. And I think that what's going to be important is that our government, and in particular the Department of Education, needs to step in. Our government, in particular the Department of Social Welfare, also needs to step in, and government in general needs to start providing some kind of direction about what it is going to do about the status and the state of racism in South Africa.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to this particular issue, I think that, they are suffering from what, as I've said, many schools are suffering from the, disagreement or the denigration of young people's identity, particularly their African identity, telling young people that they should straighten their hair, that their natural hair as it grows out of their head is not good enough, and many, many other ways in which young Black children are constantly reminded that they're not seen as people who belong in specific schools, and they're not seen as people who have a right and actually have, every single right to be in these schools, particularly because we're coming from a history of apartheid where schools were very much race-based, where there were former whites-only schools and there were former blacks-only schools. And because of this, there's a sense in which white parents still hold in their minds the idea that this school is meant for white children, and white children themselves hold this and forget that, South Africa really does belong to all who live in it. And unless and until we start engaging with each other as equally belonging in all spaces in this country, we're still going to struggle with this issue.
The Education MEC, I remember, was talking on this show about this issue that white children are still going to white schools generally, Black children still going to Black schools generally. Obviously, there are many exceptions, but we saw one of the learners holding up a placard saying, "I want more teachers who look like me." Is that a game changer? You look at diversity. So diversity across management, across teaching staff, across schools. But then how do you achieve that as well?
I think that it's a matter of starting with the principle, as I said, of thinking that this is a South African school rather than this is a white school. Because when you think of it as a South African school, then you will make the effort of making sure that every single type of South African is represented. You will make sure that there are white South Africans, that there are Black South Africans, that there are colored South Africans, and every other single identity group that is represented within South Africa. And so a lot of the time, schools want to retain their whiteness. They want to retain their white status. And they do this by ensuring that they mostly have white teachers. They mostly have white people in management. And until we start dealing with that belief that whiteness equals quality or whiteness equals superior education, then we are not going to get very far in terms of solving this problem and this issue in society. And I think schools in particular have a big responsibility in trying to deal with racism, because they, of course, carry and spend a lot of the time with young people who are the future of this country. And so if you are teaching young people that Black people are not good enough to be at a school, whether as learners or as teachers or as members of management, then you are going to see these kinds of incidents that we are regularly seeing now.
But you say government must get involved. I'd like to know practically, what do you do if you want to make quite a quick change? Do you insist on sort of quotas, Black, white, in school leadership? What do you do?
The problem we have is that there are already many policies that government can tap into. There's a language policy which in many schools, particularly the private ones, isn't being implemented. And that language policy says there must be at least one African language that is taught at schools. And in many schools, this is not being done. That's something government can start questioning schools about. You have policies within government. If you think about South African society, we have affirmative action, we have Black economic empowerment, and this is not being implemented at schools. Another policy that government could be looking into to say, why is your school failing on affirmative action, and why is your school failing on Black economic empowerment when it comes to even things like the procurement at the school? Because if you go to schools, you'll find that the majority of the schools have white teachers, white managers, and not only that, even the service providers who do sports at the school are white, even the people who run the tuck shops are white. And so there are many opportunities to bring in people who are different and people who are diverse, but none of these opportunities are being used because our government is not playing its role of regulating and ensuring that schools, like all other members of society, are actually implementing the policies that are there nationally. Because for as long as a school is on South African ground, is in South African soil, whether it's private or public, it actually does have a responsibility to follow the law of the country. And that includes making sure that there's African languages and making sure that people who are teaching children represent every single creed or person within South Africa, and making sure that even the children themselves are representative of the country that we live in. Because what we're seeing now is really scary, because you have, as people have said before, that you have Africans who are fighting to be African on African soil. And that is a situation that should be unacceptable, because you will never go to China and find Chinese people fighting to be Chinese in China. But we have the situation in South Africa because we come from a history of apartheid. We come from a history of colonialism, and we haven't even begun to do the deep work of unpacking what that means, and the deep work of unpacking what is the burden, what is the historical burden that apartheid, that colonialism has left us with, and how are we going to begin the process of revealing the layers and starting to say our society is racist, our society is sexist, our society is homophobic, and how are we going to deal with that?
Yeah. Finally, I mean, just on a practical point, in America, the president talking about sensitivity training for police officers who sometimes just don't know what they're doing because of the way they've been brought up, the way they've always viewed things without questioning it. Is there scope for that here? And the issue of hair often comes up. I mean, do we need some practical guidelines there, and officials saying just leave the children's hair alone? Should we state that explicitly for schools?
Yes, I think we definitely need to make sure that the policies at the schools are and do adhere to national policies, and that the policies at the school do not discriminate against people. But some of the work that I do, for example, is I've built a diversity and social justice curriculum that is being rolled out at a school and will be rolled out at many more schools. So we can use things like curriculum in order to encourage people. I also do diversity training, and I do unconscious bias training in order to help people to build racial literacy and to be able to see and know when they are acting in ways that are prejudiced. Because when you are raised in a society that tells you that white is superior and black is inferior, it's very difficult to undo some of that learning without intentionally sitting somebody down and either in a workshop, a training, or a curriculum, helping them to understand the genesis of that kind of thinking and why it's not acceptable in our society.
All right, thank you so much for your time tonight. Diversity trainer Asanda Ngoasheng.